My name is Layla, I'm 27, and the person I trusted the most just destroyed my career. Or at least that's what he thought. My CEO smirked. Layla, we're downsizing. Clear your desk by tomorrow. I nodded. Of course. He didn't know I already had a plan that would leave him speechless. You want to know what betrayal feels like? It's sitting in a boardroom at 9 a.m. on a Friday morning, thinking you're there to discuss the quarterly projections you've been working on for weeks, only to have your boss, the man who hired you, who told you that you were the future of the company, look you dead in the eye and tell you that your services are no longer required. Just like that. 3 years of my life. 3 years of 60-hour weeks, of missing family dinners and canceled dates, of believing in a vision that I helped build from the ground up, gone. But let me back up. Let me tell you exactly how this nightmare began. Because the devil, as they say, is in the details. I started working at Morrison Tech Solutions straight out of college. It was a mid-sized software development company with big dreams and an even bigger ego at the helm, Marcus Morrison. When I walked into that first interview, Marcus was everything I thought a successful CEO should be. Confident, charismatic, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my rent. He talked about disrupting the industry, about building something revolutionary, and when he looked at me and said, Layla, I think you could be part of something special here, I believed him. God, I was so naive. For 3 years, I poured everything I had into that company. I wasn't just another employee, I was Marcus's right hand. I knew his business better than he did. I knew which clients were unhappy before they even called to complain. I knew which projects were bleeding money before the accounting department figured it out. I lived and breathed Morrison Tech, and Marcus knew it. He used to call me his secret weapon. He'd lean back in his leather chair during our one-on-ones and say, Layla, what would I do without you? And fool that I was, I thought he actually meant it. I thought I was indispensable. I thought loyalty mattered. The irony is that I saw the signs. The company had been struggling for months. We'd lost 2 major contracts in the first quarter, and our biggest competitor, Apex Innovations, had been systematically poaching our clients. Marcus would pace around the office like a caged animal, snapping at anyone who dared to suggest that maybe, just maybe, our approach needed to change. But whenever I brought up strategic pivots or new market opportunities, he'd wave me off. We just need to work harder, Layla. Success is about persistence. Persistence. That word makes me sick now. The morning of my termination, I walked into that boardroom with a presentation I'd spent 3 weeks perfecting. It was a comprehensive analysis of how we could not only recover from our losses but actually expand our market share. I had charts, projections, client testimonials from companies that had expressed interest in working with us. I was excited. I thought this was going to be the moment that saved Morrison Tech. Instead, Marcus was sitting at the head of the conference table with Linda from HR and some lawyer I'd never seen before. The presentation I'd prepared was nowhere to be seen on the agenda. There was no agenda. There was just a manila folder with my name on it and a severance agreement inside. Layla, Marcus said, and his voice had that patronizing tone that I'd grown to hate. I want to thank you for your dedication to Morrison Tech. You've been valuable. Valuable. Past tense. However, he continued, and I could see where this was going, we're facing some tough economic realities. We need to streamline our operations, reduce overhead. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. I sat there in stunned silence as he explained that my position was being eliminated effective immediately. Not reduced, not restructured, eliminated. As if 3 years of my expertise could just be erased with the stroke of a pen. The worst part? He actually looked sorry. He put on this mask of regret, like firing me was some great personal sacrifice he was making for the good of the company. Layla, you're talented. You'll land on your feet. I know you will. If you love stories where the underdog wins, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know who's cheering me on. But here's what Marcus didn't know. Here's what his arrogance blinded him to. While he was busy playing corporate politics and pretending that working harder was a substitute for working smarter, I had been having conversations. Conversations with people who actually recognized my worth. 3 months earlier, I'd been at an industry conference, one that Morrison Tech had sent me to because Marcus was too busy to attend himself. I was networking, as any good employee should, when I struck up a conversation with a woman named Sarah Chen at the coffee station. She introduced herself as the VP of Strategic Development at Apex Innovations, our biggest competitor. The company that Marcus loved to trash talk during staff meetings. Morrison Tech, Sarah had said when I told her where I worked. Marcus Morrison's company. Interesting. I expected her to say something cutting, something competitive. Instead, she looked genuinely curious. What's it like working there? I've heard mixed things about their company culture. And that's when I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of giving her the company line about how innovative and dynamic we were, I told her the truth. I told her about the outdated systems we were still using, about the client relationships that were deteriorating because Marcus refused to adapt to market changes, about the brilliant ideas that got shot down because they didn't fit his narrow vision. Sarah listened. Really listened. And then she said something that stuck with me. Layla, talent is talent, regardless of where it's currently being wasted. We exchanged business cards, and over the next few weeks, Sarah and I had several more conversations. Casual coffee meetings that gradually became more strategic discussions. She was interested in my insights about the industry, about Morrison Tech's client base, about market opportunities that bigger companies like Apex might be missing. And then, 2 weeks before my termination, Sarah made me an offer. Not just any offer. A position as Director of Strategic Partnerships at Apex Innovations. A role that didn't exist before our conversations. A role designed specifically around my skills and experience. The salary was 40% higher than what Morrison Tech was paying me. The benefits were better. The office was better. Hell, even the coffee was better. But the real kicker? The position came with something Marcus had never given me: respect. Sarah saw me as a strategic asset, not just another employee to be managed and manipulated. I didn't accept immediately. Part of me, the loyal, naive part that still believed in Marcus's vision, thought I should give Morrison Tech one more chance. I thought maybe if I showed them my presentation, if I proved how valuable I really was, things would change. What a joke. So when Marcus sat there with his fake concerned expression and told me that my services were no longer required, I almost left. Almost. Instead, I nodded professionally and said, "Of course. I understand." I signed the severance agreement. I shook hands with Linda from HR. I even thanked Marcus for the opportunities he'd given me. And the whole time, I was thinking about the email I was going to send to Sarah as soon as I got home. Walking out of Morrison Tech that day felt like stepping out of a prison I hadn't realized I was in. The security guard who walked me to my car was apologetic, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Sorry about this, Ms. Parker," he said as I loaded my boxes into my trunk. "You were always good to us." That's when it hit me. The security guards knew my worth. The administrative staff knew my worth. Hell, even the cleaning crew knew that I was the one who actually kept things running smoothly. Everyone knew except the one person whose opinion supposedly mattered. I went home and called Sarah immediately. "I'm ready to accept your offer," I said. "I was hoping you'd say that," she replied. "When can you start?" "Monday." There was a pause. "Layla, are you sure? You literally just left Morrison Tech today. Don't you want to take some time, decompress a little?" "Sarah," I said, and I could hear the steel in my own voice. "I've been decompressing for 3 years. I'm ready to start living." That weekend was the longest 48 hours of my life. I oscillated between rage and excitement, between vindication and terror. Was I making the right decision? Was I burning bridges I might need later? What if Marcus found out where I was going? And then Monday morning arrived. My first day at Apex was everything Morrison Tech wasn't. The building was modern, sleek, filled with natural light. The technology was cutting edge. The people I met were genuinely excited about their work, not just going through the motions. Sarah gave me a tour, introduced me to my new team, and showed me to my office, an actual office with a window and a door that closed, not the glorified cubicle I'd had at Morrison Tech. But the real moment, the moment that made everything worth it, came at 10 a.m. "Layla," Sarah said, poking her head into my office, "we've got a client presentation in conference room A. I'd love for you to sit in, get a feel for how we handle these meetings." I followed her down the hall, and she opened the door to a massive conference room with a wall of windows overlooking the city. The Apex team was already seated around a polished table that probably cost more than Morrison Tech's entire quarterly marketing budget. And then I saw him. Marcus Morrison, sitting across from Sarah with two of his remaining senior staff members, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. He was there for a client presentation, but not as the presenter. He was there as the supplicant, trying to convince Apex to subcontract some overflow work that Morrison Tech couldn't handle on their own. How the mighty had fallen. Sarah gestured for me to take a seat, and I chose one directly across from Marcus. For a moment, our eyes met, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been horror. Marcus, Sarah said pleasantly, I'd like you to meet our new Director of Strategic Partnerships, Layla Parker. She'll be overseeing all of our subcontractor relationships going forward. The color drained from Marcus's face. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. Layla? But you were just I thought you were. Laid off? I said, keeping my voice perfectly professional. Yes, I was. It turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. The irony was delicious. Marcus had come to Apex hoping to secure enough subcontract work to keep Morrison Tech afloat for another quarter. Instead, he was face to face with the woman he'd discarded, who now held his company's fate in her hands. Sarah, who clearly understood the dynamics at play, smiled sweetly. Layla brings extensive experience working with smaller firms in our industry. I can't think of anyone better qualified to evaluate potential partnerships. I spent the next hour asking Marcus detailed questions about Morrison Tech's capabilities, their client base, their financial stability. Questions I already knew the answers to, but questions that forced him to admit, in front of his own employees, just how precarious his company's situation really was. When he mentioned their recent client losses, I nodded sympathetically. Yes, I heard about Davidson Industries dropping their contract. That must have been difficult. When he tried to spin their outdated systems as proven and reliable, I asked pointed questions about scalability and integration capabilities that left him fumbling for answers. And when he pitched their team's experience and expertise, I looked him directly in the eye and said, Of course, you'll understand that we'll need to thoroughly vet any team we work with. We found that sometimes companies present a different picture externally than what actually exists internally. By the end of the meeting, Marcus looked like he'd been put through a blender. His confident facade had crumbled, and he was practically begging for a chance to prove that Morrison Tech could handle Apex's standards. Comment below where you're watching from. I want to know who's cheering me on. As we wrapped up, Sarah turned to me. Layla, what's your initial assessment of this potential partnership? I pretended to consider it carefully, tapping my pen against my notebook. I think Morrison Tech has some interesting capabilities, but I'd need to see significant improvements in their project management processes and client retention strategies before I could recommend moving forward. Perhaps we could schedule a follow-up meeting in 6 months? 6 months. In tech industry terms, that was basically a death sentence. Marcus knew it, I knew it, and everyone in that room knew it. But Marcus couldn't say anything. He couldn't point out that I used to work for him, that I knew all of his company's weaknesses, that this whole situation was incredibly unprofessional. Because doing so would only highlight how badly he'd miscalculated in firing me. Instead, he nodded stiffly and said, Of course. We'll work on those areas you mentioned. After he left, Sarah closed the door and looked at me with something approaching. That was masterful, she said. Ruthless, but masterful. I learned from the best, I replied. Just not in the way he intended. But the story doesn't end there. Because Marcus's humiliation in that conference room was just the beginning. Over the next few months, I threw myself into my new role with a passion I'd never felt at Morrison Tech. I wasn't just doing a job, I was building something meaningful. Sarah gave me the autonomy to pursue strategic partnerships that actually made sense, not just deals that fed someone's ego. And the more successful I became at Apex, the more I heard about Morrison Tech's continued decline. Through industry contacts, I learned that they'd lost 3 more major clients within 2 months of my departure. The presentation I'd prepared, the one that could have saved them, was never presented. Marcus had apparently thrown it away after my termination meeting, dismissing it as irrelevant given our new direction. What new direction? They didn't have one. Without someone to handle client relationships and strategic planning, Morrison Tech was just a rudderless ship taking on water. Then came the news I'd been waiting for. 6 months after my termination, Marcus called Sarah directly. Not to schedule the follow-up meeting we discussed, but to ask if Apex would be interested in acquiring Morrison Tech's assets. He was selling. The company he'd built, the vision he'd been so protective of, the future he'd sacrificed everything for. He was ready to give it all up. Sarah, professional as always, scheduled a meeting to discuss the potential acquisition. And of course, she asked me to lead the due diligence process. The second meeting was even sweeter than the first. Marcus walked into that same conference room looking like he'd aged 5 years in 6 months. Gone was the expensive suit, replaced by something off the rack that didn't quite fit right. Gone was the confident posture, replaced by the hunched shoulders of defeat. This time, I was the one sitting at the head of the table. "Marcus," I said, not bothering with pleasantries, "let's talk numbers." For the next 2 hours, I dissected Morrison Tech's financials with surgical precision. I highlighted every weakness, every missed opportunity, every strategic error that had led to this moment. And Marcus sat there and took it, because he had no choice. The final insult came when I presented Apex's offer. It was fair, generous, even, but it was a fraction of what Morrison Tech would have been worth if Marcus had listened to my ideas instead of dismissing them. "This offer," I said, sliding the papers across the table, "represents a significant investment in Morrison Tech's remaining assets. However, I should mention that the deal is contingent on a complete restructuring of leadership and operations." Marcus looked up sharply. "What does that mean exactly?" Sarah leaned forward. "It means that Apex would be acquiring the client base, the technology, and the talent, but we'd be integrating everything into our existing structure. There wouldn't be a need for duplicate leadership positions." The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't just selling his company. He was selling himself out of a job. I see," he stammered. "And what about the existing management team?" I smiled, and I made sure it wasn't a kind smile. "Well, we'd certainly evaluate everyone's fit within our organization. Of course, we'd prioritize candidates who have demonstrated strategic thinking and adaptability, skills that are absolutely essential in today's market." He got the message.